Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Like to go ahead and call this meeting to order and welcome everyone to the Coeur d'Alene School District 271 Budget Adoption and Board Workshop of June 24th, 2024. Would everyone please rise and together we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks. I'd like to introduce our participants for this afternoon, and starting at my far right is Miss Marianne Southwick, Clerk of the Board, Dr. Sean Hucker, Superintendent. To my immediate left is Miss Leslie Bierke. We were just talking about your name. Miss Leslie Bierke, Vice Chair, Miss Heather Tenbrink, Board Member, Miss Allie Anderton, Board Member, Mr. Jimmy McAndrew, Board Member, and I'm Rebecca Smith, Board Chair. Public comment will not be taken at this meeting. Comments for the board may be submitted via email at trustees@cdaschools.org. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve today's agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Agenda approved. We're going to move right into then the consideration of the approval of our amended budget. And Shannon, do you have anything to present at this moment? Or the first two action items are the amended budget and then the proposed budget?
Yeah, so nothing to present for tonight. We have the budget hearing, which is we had an hour and a half budget hearing presentation. So tonight is just for the approval of the 2023-24, the revised, and then the next action item would be the approval of the 2024-25 budget.
Great.
Oh, I guess one thing to know, our budget book is in development, so we will have that in July, and that is the really nice in-depth narrative. We were going to hopefully be able to release it after negotiations, but we won't be able to. So we will do a revised budget and then revise the budget book right after those negotiations. So, but it is coming in July, and so stay tuned.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. So this is our amended budget. Is there any discussion, or we can move right to a motion to? We all had a lot of questions, and so the community that might be watching could look back at our budget hearing as well. So we can go right to a motion too.
I move to approve the 23-24 amended budget as presented at the June 10th, 2024 budget hearing.
Thanks.
Right.
Is there a second?
Oh, yes. That's
Second.
correct.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. Hearing none, then our amended budget is approved. And then we move to the 2024-25 working budget as presented at the June 10th, 2024 budget hearing. Is there a motion or?
I already asked all my questions, so. hopefully
Okay.
that's all.
I move to approve the 24-25 working budget as presented at the June 10th, 2024 budget hearing.
Terrific. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. All right, so both budgets. Thank you, Shannon,
All
again.
right, thank you.
She's
Another another year of budgets with you guys, so appreciate it. Thank you for all. It was a lot of work that everyone put in this spring, especially all of the trustees, so thank you.
Thanks, and we look forward to the book. Yeah, for those, that'll be our second year, right?
It'll be our
With
second
that book,
year,
and the
yes.
last year was really informative, so for those watching at home, we look forward with anticipation. So, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, we have a consent agenda then this evening, and one item on that, which is the certified staff rehire list. So is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Is there a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right. Our staff are rehired. We're going to move then into the workshop portion then of tonight's agenda, which is on the maintenance and operation levy for this next year. All right, Dr. Hucker.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we have a couple of items to discuss today and get some guidance from the trustees today. Seth, you want to advance to the next slide? So, yep, thanks. Well, I think I skipped it, so I'll back up myself. But so there's two topics that we need to discuss, and that is obviously the date of when to potentially ask for this levy this next school year. You have two dates as options. One is November. I know there's a slide up there somewhere back at the back that shows, even one more back, I think it shows the dates available. We must have lost a slide. Anyway, there is two dates. It is the general election in November, and it is the primary election in May of 25. Those are your two options to consider renewing the current $25 million levy. So along that, so that's kind of part one is we want to go over the pros and cons of each of those dates and really just have a good working understanding of what that might look like. And then the second item is obviously to discuss in further detail the renewal amount and what that might look like, tax implications to the community, those sorts of things we want to kind of walk through, because the timeline would be as such. Unless you choose to have another workshop perhaps in July, which right now there's no workshops on the docket for July, we would take what we learned today and we will prepare the details for you to formally approve at your August regular board meeting, or at the very latest your August workshop meeting. Sometime, I'm going to just say September 1st just as a date, but sometime plus or minus a week of that date is when we're required to submit that resolution to the county to be able to be placed on a November ballot, if you choose that November is the right month to run this levy. So you can see that timeline kind of matters, and we'll discuss that as far as our workshop today, so that we can kind of go over all things. So let's talk about for a second this slide here and talk about the general timing for November. You can see that obviously the very first item we listed up there as a positive for a November is that you're going to get to hear your community's perspectives. Generally speaking, you have a large voter turnout. If you remember back at the May of 23 levy, I believe it was. Am I off on that when we ran the last levy? May of 23. We had received the highest voter turnout really in the history of the school district ever running a school district ballot. And we had about 29,000-ish voters come out for that vote. But I hear that you're going to have potentially far more than that show up for a general election. So that might be considered a pro, might be considered a con, but we just listed it down as a known item that you are likely going to have a high voter turnout for November. We've listed down, more inclusive, increased community visibility and cost efficiencies, other reasons that might justify choosing to run it in November. You want to go to the next slide? I think that's the one that also has few more highlights there of the general election, and I think there's one more I'm looking for. Nope, we must have kind of made some edits too, right?
Can you go back to the benefits one, please? The benefits, that one, start, because I haven't had a chance to see.
So high voter turnout. The increased community visibility, I think, is a potential plus, because there's just a lot of election information flowing around, that time of year. Again, maybe pro or con, but again, realistic point of more information, floating out there. Oh, there's Mr. Nelson. Okay. Any specific details? There's a few things that come to my mind that we must have deleted out of a slide, as far as the pros there. But I know we've also got those listed as far as the May. If you choose to run it in May, maybe some of the cons of running it in May as well. Do you want to just go to the next slide, and we'll just kind of cover both of these all together. Stephanie, is there anything specific you want to call out with any of these?
There it is.
In the last general election in 2020, I think we had something like 95,000 voters that turned out for that election. So that's just what happens here. With the general, compared to, I think the last primary, last month in May, 25% of our voters turned out, 25,000 or so. So what I'm hearing is people are expecting this next general to be a high voter turnout election because people are very opinionated about what happens there. So just know that. The cost efficiency, the piece that, when we want people to show up for a primary, for example, we have to try to help get that message out because primaries are just not generally well attended. With a general, we don't have that burden because it's being done for us by others that are campaigning or on the ballot, but that's a bonus. These three areas of consideration here, the ballot crowding, these are kind of the downsides of a general, of having our levy on a general election ballot. There's a lot there. I'm not sure that hurts us really, but there's more options on a ballot in the general, and voters can get fatigued and just decide not to pay attention to initiatives or anything in addition. The political climate around increased taxes is always an issue in this community, and so that's absolutely in play in a general election. And then communications investment, when there's a lot going on and you want people to pay attention, we would want people to pay attention to a levy vote. We have to make sure that the messaging that we have and our communications are making it through all of the other campaign noise that's out there. So there's an increased expectation for investment if we're putting our levy on a general. And then these, Dr. Hawker, are the May considerations if the levy is on the May 2024 ballot.
Correct. And I think just to reiterate as well, again, one of the challenges with waiting and putting it on the ballot in May is that from November-ish, when we start budget work for that following school year, from November till May, essentially your HR department, your finance department will have to do double the work. We will have to prepare a budget as if we have the levy, and we'll have to prepare a budget as if we don't have the levy. We will have to have all of those same conversations as to what the reductions of that levy will look like, and we have to staff accordingly and decide what programs are going to be cut. All of that's going to take place that 6 months anyway, which obviously creates some concern from my perspective from just staff morale. We just went through this just recently with a $6 million reduction, and we actually went through this recently a year and a half ago with the actual levy itself. It is brutal, I think, is a great word to describe the staff morale during that time. So I think that's one of the downsides of waiting until May. I also think, so we highlighted it there with the stress, and then I think it's just very clear to understand, as designed by the legislature with the specific removal of the March levy date. If you choose to wait until May, it's a one and done option. So there is no time, because as I said, we will have to build both budgets during the spring and be ready to go, pass or fail, with whatever the results are in May. There's no second run, there's no redo, there's nothing. By the time that levy vote occurs, and you have to formally put your budget in the newspaper and adopt it in June, like you did this year, June 10th, it's just a quick turnaround. And so you have to have all that work done in advance. So I think that's just something to be mindful of. So any questions about any of that before we go to the next slide? And we can come back to any and all this at any time. We want this to be a live working conversation.
Is this something you could share with us? Just, I like to go through everything.
for
on
sure.
our time. Thanks.
Should have done that. Sorry about that.
So there's the conversation of March, or excuse me, of May, and there's a conversation of November and the pros and cons. So I think really before I get into the next part of this conversation has to do with the renewal itself. Any conversations, any thoughts of whether you're leaning towards November, whether you're leaning towards a May? I just want to be able to answer any and all questions because like I said, if your choice is November, we will need to bring that to you at your August board meeting ready for adoption. I have asked somewhere between a half a dozen and a dozen of our business leaders in town this exact same question because I just want to hear their perspective. And the overwhelming majority feel that November's the better month to do that. You get a better voter turnout. You get to take advantage of, as Stephanie said, other people coming to the polls for other specific reasons. But there is the risk that you also have is that in November the levy fails, and then you are all spring all the staff know that 25% of every program, everything we do is going to be reduced anyway. But the downside the benefit of running it in a November would be that you could create some staff morale. The staff would be less stressed in the spring. If the levy were to pass, then budgets be put together accordingly, and people would know that the programs, the offerings that they provide to students are going to be there the next couple years. So there's the pros and cons of that, of November versus May. I'd love to hear your thoughts on date preferences.
Can I ask one question just as a reminder? It's 50 plus 1 is the percentage to pass. So it's 50 plus 1 of those who vote for the levy, or
Correct.
who turn out to vote in general
Those that turn out and actually cast a ballot.
and cast a ballot for
correct.
the levy. I mean, so that mark yes or no. I know it's been a little bit.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It just occurs to me that you have to take as many swings at it as possible. Just that one piece by itself puts me over the edge to go with November. Just seems, irregardless of the pros and cons of November, I think you have to have as many swings as possible. And it also gives you the ability to make adjustments your second time if you have to go about it. So I don't see the upside of November far outweighs the downside of waiting until May. And I think this is going to be hanging over people's heads regardless of what happens, if it's on a ballot or not in November. So I'd like the shot of having it be a one and done as opposed to just hanging out the entire year.
I would say for me, I'm leaning towards November because I like the idea of cost efficiency. I want to save as much money as possible. And if we could save money on the advertising and whatnot, whatever it is that we do, I like that idea. And I also like the idea that there's a higher voter turnout, and it really gives us an opportunity to see what a larger portion of our community feels about supporting these levies. So for me, that kind of pushes me towards that. Those are my two kind of big reasons.
I'm really torn. I lean towards November, barely, just for staff morale and making budgets and, to have to approve a budget 2 weeks after we actually know what our revenue will be is hard. So I'm barely November, I think.
Could you speak more to your hesitations? 'Cause I think that's
I think just the
important, and-
noise. I have some concerns about, there's just a lot of other stuff happening at the November election. And, you know, you got to make sure we're going to be at the bottom, right? You got to make sure people know to go all the way to the bottom of the ballot, because that's where we'll be. So, so that's my primary concern with it.
I think I could just echo what Trustee Bierke and McAndrews have both stated. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think Trustee Timberg, I think you bring up a good point. It is all the other noise. It is all the things. It is those pieces that give me pause. But in general, I'd go for a November. So.
Okay, well that helps with some guidance. Again, no decisions, no formal votes or anything are today anyway, but this will help us prepare for a resolution to potentially be adopted at your August board meeting. And we'll tentatively today plan for November. Again, we can always revisit this at that time and make changes if other things happen and come up between now and then. So so thank you for that. So I guess that would bring us then to kind of phase 2 of this workshop, and that has to do with the renewal of the levy. You can see here that our current levy is $25 million, and it is anticipated that to renew that levy, we just need to remind the trustees that a current renewal is likely going to require about a $250,000 $750,000 reduction in expenses each year during that levy year, and that's factoring in a very modest 3% inflationary component on those dollars. So I think that's important to know, because you just have spent the last several months trying to look at a $6 million budget reduction to the school district and what that entailed. And so keeping the levy renewed at the $25 million certainly would be the minimum ask. And however, will likely, but unknown, there's so many factors that go into that, but it will likely still require some budget reductions at this time next year for that next budget year, and then also the same thing the following year. If you chose to try to keep things as level as you could, you would need to consider a $25.75 million levy, and that would essentially incorporate the 3% each year's anticipated inflationary components. But I want to go over kind of each of those in a little further detail. So you want to jump to the next slide. So giving you just that overall levy rate perspective, you've seen this slide for the last several years. You can see that the district's done well over the last decade or so in decreasing the levy tax burden to the community. So even this year we're down a titch from last year, and I think that's going to just continue. Again, we can only share out today what we hard knowledges, not knows from a NO perspective, but a hard knowledge perspective, and then we'll know more information even in August, and may require a workshop date to provide that information before we vote. But you can see that the levy rates are really low now, down at the below the dollar, below the dollar range. So let's advance to the next slide, if you would, please. Thanks. Wished I could control this. So obviously, from a tax perspective, we can see this slide's pretty simple. If you keep things the same, taxes are going to be the same, right? It's basically a zero increase to our community. Let's jump to the next slide. If you were to choose to increase it by that $750,000 each of those years, you would see that it's anticipated that a tax increase to the community would be about $12. This is for the year, so it'd be about $1 a month to taxpayers. Now, again, I would anticipate that it'll be less than that because there will be tax reductions in the works, but we just don't know what that's going to equal out to. So today we share out what we do know, and we do know that if you chose to levy for the 25.75, you're asking for $1 a month or $12 for the year. Any questions about those two slides?
No question, but our property levy rates have gone, they're at a historic low right now, so this is gonna be a lot of wind behind us, so it's more of a reason to do this in November to me. Sorry, wasn't on there. Yeah, anyways, just the tax levy rates are so low, I have yet to find, I mean, assessments are up, but most people's taxes are down on their property, so it's just a good time for this to be married with the fact that they've got lower taxes.
Yeah.
I had a question about the graph, that levy rate graph. Does that include our bonds as well, or just the supplemental?
Yeah, so up to 2023, it does include our bonds, but going into tax year 2024, which is our upcoming fiscal year, we do not have to levy for our bonds for next year because of the House Bill 292 property tax relief. And we will expect that 94 cents per thousand to even be lower, but we need to know we won't get our property tax relief funding allocation until August, but so 94 cents is without the property tax relief, so we can expect to even be lower than
So
that.
it probably will be lower. We just
It will
don't know.
for sure
the
be
number.
lower, but
Okay.
we can't say anything until we know. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Shannon, does any of the tax relief from House Bill 521 go into any of this at all?
It does not, no. So we are going to, once elect the lump sum, so that will go towards the facility projects. But House Bill 292, we got 3.7 million this year. Don't know what next year is. That will definitely be enough to not have to levy for any of our bonds, and then go also to our supplemental levy. So
Okay, one more question. We're sure about this $12 increase? It's not going to later be something higher?
So we only know what we know, and that is we're
Okay.
using our current assessed value. So if it would be higher if assessed values did go down, but I can't predict if the assessed values go down. So we can have those estimates on what we know today. But we're using tax rates that we know are higher than what they will be.
Okay, you're talking about assessed values on property, right?
Yeah.
Okay, just want to
Yeah.
make sure.
No, thanks for
Following along.
clarifying.
Questions?
So this $12 is without the property tax
Without
relief as
property
well.
tax relief and assuming the same assessed value that we have in the current 2023 tax year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, let's jump back to the PowerPoint. Stephanie, do you want to advance us back up since, or whoever's doing it? I don't know if it's Stephanie or Seth in the booth. Somebody said, okay, thanks. So you can see we just wanted to show that specific, picture so that you can have that conversation. All right, let's go to the next slide. That's it. And so the next slide is the conversation. It's really just we wanted to give you that high level overview of the levy. I also we just want to make sure that we answer all of your questions and get a feel for what your thoughts are, whether your thoughts are to support potentially a renewal of the existing 25, if your thoughts are to support potentially a renewal of the 25.75, what's your overall thoughts, because that will also work into the resolution that we will need to bring with you so that we can have all the details in that specific resolution for a potential August approval if you're going to put it on the November ballot. So lots of ifs in all that conversation, but just wanted to spend today's workshop answering any and all questions that you might have towards that upcoming levy. I know that this was a conversation I had hoped to have in the spring, so that you wouldn't be feeling like you have to do this today and then vote on it in August. But obviously, as you know, your spring was also very occupied in other budget scenarios and reductions and things, and so we just didn't want to overwhelm any trustee, of course, or even our community. So it makes the best sense to have this conversation today in this workshop, and that's what we've dedicated this meeting for. So questions?
I guess my hope would be whatever we do, get it done in November. And so my initial gut reaction is well, twofold. So we're looking at a difference of 3%. What goes away if we don't go with 25.75 million? What's the impact there? And or with what we've done as far as cutting, up to this point, have we done enough that the impact won't be felt as severely if we go without this 3% increase? Because I like both of those. Those were what I would have hoped to have seen. But if we can go to the public and say, hey, we're not moving it, the needle's not moving, does that get us a successful levy push in November? Because if you told me, yes, it's guaranteed, I would say, let's do it and get it over with. But those are my questions.
Well, thanks. Let me answer some of those questions, and we'll just keep going around the room and ask. And anybody that wants to chime in, please feel free. I think so. You have spent the spring reviewing the $6 million, reductions, and we kind of created a priority list, and the board kind of went through, and we ended up selecting, I'm going to say, most all of the level 1s and 2s and 3s, and maybe a few less of the 4s and 5s. So I think it's reasonable if you're trying to identify specifically what comes next. It could be some of those items that we already identified, this spring. I think today I'm nervous, I'll say, of sharing out and saying this is exactly what you'll do, because you have options, right? We know that you switching to a 4-day week saved the district some money, right? So you could choose to have that be one of your strategies one of those 2 years if you chose to keep the levy flat, and if inflation still was 3% like we're targeting each of those years, and you really had to cut $750,000, you could choose to possibly move to a 4-day week one of those years, and that could be that could solve that inflationary trade-off that year, right? That's one option. There are all those items we identified in phases 4 and 5 as well that could potentially be options. So, but I think the biggest picture is just to recognize that there will be a need to do something for all intents and purposes. Now, we can't predict if student enrollment changes, that could be, good or additionally bad, right? If state funding changed, that could be good or additionally bad. There's so many things that I think, just like the levy rate discussion we just had, I think all we can deal with is what we know today, and that's probably the safest, conversation to have. But I think, so my answer to you, Jimmy, would simply be we could present a updated, revised reduction plan and share that out at your August board meeting before you would potentially vote. If you wanted to keep the levy, relatively flat and keep it at its current, 25, and then you can look at that review list and see. I think the safe conversation for me to have tonight is that there would still just need to be cuts. We all know, right? And I think that's one of my, I'll just say for a second, it's one of my frustrations that school districts in Idaho have to go to vote to take up an inflationary component. Most every other taxing agency in the state doesn't have to do that, but we do, and so that matters. I think every one of us in this room today would agree that we would rather not have a levy. That is clear. We would love to not have that. But I think it's also just very important to make sure our community and our stakeholders completely understand. By design, within our legislature, the legislature funds about 70% of school needs. And so that, by design, the legislature expects the local community to figure out that other percent. And for us, it's, I'm going to say 65%. And so that other 25% or so, maybe some federal funds get worked in there. So somewhere in that, I'm just being general in my numbers, but it's an expectation that if we want to offer programs above and beyond what the state pays, it is a local requirement. It's a local support expectation from our legislators and how that's funded. And that is why the vast majority of school districts have some sort of a levy to do this. So please know that barring that, if we choose to keep it flat at 25, I think there would be a I think it just needs to be known that we could be back here at this next year at this time looking at, okay, well, what can we do to address the $750,000 so that we need to address? And although I'd like to say, hey, that's not a, we can figure that out. I know that after reducing $6 million, I know what every $20,000 looks like, let alone $750,000. And so there'll be some difficult conversations to have. But I would rather reduce $750,000 than lose $25 million. So I think we'd all agree to that, right? I also think it's fair to share out. That's why we wanted to show the conversation. I can't predict what our tax levy rates will be. So based on what we know today, if you chose to factor in that inflation and that 3%, you're looking at $1 a month to the average homeowner in the community. And I think that's important for you as trustees to know, because you can make that decision. Do you think the community would support $1 a month to keep the programs, or do you think it's safer to not do that and cut whatever, change a schedule, whatever those options are to maybe do that? I think it's just important to know that something will need to be done. Does that kind of answer your question there, Jimmy? Lots
What
to
is
consider.
that? Do we know what that levy rate needs to be at in order to be a wash? Ish, probably 93, right?
What do you mean a wash? Just keeping it flat?
Right,
Keeping our current rates?
right.
Okay.
Keeping the levy rate, the rate flat.
Just to make up for that 750.
Oh, we don't
Yeah.
know yet, but yeah,
There's
I
a
can
good
I can
chance it
calculate
will.
that.
I mean, there's a good chance that will happen.
Yeah,
And we'll know that before we go to vote, or we won't know that before we go.
yeah.
to vote.
We'll know that in August, so mid-August. So I don't know when
It
you have to
likely
vote
would
on the
need to occur
resolution.
at your workshop, because your regular board meeting, I think, is before mid-August when we're going to know that.
Okay.
So you would need to possibly hold off the challenge with holding off, and I've got to confirm this with the county, and maybe Marianne already has. Okay, so you could choose to approve it at your August 28th workshop that we're trying to put together. You could have one action item on that workshop to approve that detail if September 6th is what you said. September 6th is the due date for the resolution to be into the county to make the deadline for the November ballot.
Yeah, I typically wouldn't quabble over this. It's just I want it to go in November and be off of everybody's plates, and every talking point that we have is good ammo. But I think the county can probably give us a lot of good data, just showing really perspective on where people's property taxes are, and they're way farther ahead than $12 than what we're looking at. So those are just some ideas, questions.
I'm not sure how to formulate those questions. I'm just going to say it. If it doesn't make sense, I'll deal with it at the time. Because this would be a question. If we decided to go with the increased amount, and should our enrollment continue to drop more than the anticipated 350 that was estimated, would this increased amount would that kind of pad us enough so we wouldn't have to make as much cuts, or would we still have to make cuts even with that amount? I hope that makes sense.
Well, that makes sense, and you're asking really difficult questions.
But I know people will
which-
ask that.
which is a
if
f- which is
we
a
were
fair
to go-
question.
Yeah.
Yes,
So I think that's I know it's a tricky question. You may not know the answer. Maybe you can come back with it.
Well, here's what I think we can say. I think Eric, I'm looking at Eric because I think we had a conversation a little bit about that today. In general, if enrollment falls, we have to right size our staffing, right? And right sizing our staffing creates cost savings, to the district. So there is a trade-off specifically there. In general, overall terms, we also recognize that with decreased state revenue, it creates a higher need for the levy. And so, although yes, I do think there could be avenues to save additional dollars, I think one thing that we've never done but we always could do, and I would love to do it at some juncture, is to have the authority to levy a $25.75 million levy, but perhaps you don't need to. Perhaps from some reason we only want to levy 24.75. To do that would show our community that we aren't levying just because we can. We're levying what we need in order to maintain our current, operations. So I think it's just, I would love to be in a situation at some juncture where we could ever do that. There's just so many moving numbers with declining enrollment and how to adjust all of that I think the safest answer is just, yes, we would receive less dollars from the state, plain and simple. And our levy generally funds, what our levy funds from an enhancement to our salaries over what the state pays, our enhancement of several staffing positions that are more than what the state allocates, although we've made some significant adjustments this year with our needed reductions. So my hope would be, again, to recap, would be that if you ever didn't need to levy that full 25.75, if that's what you chose to ask for, and you could ever reduce that levy by some amount, I think that could be pretty telling to your community that you are obviously very fiscally minded and responsible, and you don't just levy because you can. With that said, I don't know if that will happen for a long time, because there is more of a need on levy dollars when state dollars perhaps shrink. Shannon could probably go into it way more financial details than that, but I'm just keeping that at a big high level answer. Other thoughts? I mean, it lots to consider here.
One thought I just had, when we talk about a schedule change could help with a potential shortfall, if we stuck at 25 million. And I know many of us are interested in a schedule change, or at least having that discussion about a schedule change. But I really would love to make that decision based on academics and what we think will be good for our schools and our students' success, rather than budget reasons, maybe there's a budget savings and that would be awesome, but I would really love to have that discussion without feeling pressure for a budget reason. So that's the thought I have.
Well, I appreciate that thought. We're going to study the 4-day week, much more this fall. And as I said, if we're ever going to make a change, you want to do that by January, February at the latest in any given year anyway. But I think it's fair to say that there's ample research to show that some 4-day weeks are being very successful. But there are also, as you just went through this discussion, and we considered a 4-day week for this next school year, it's a big picture, not just academics, but also, community involvement, community needs. We heard from a lot of community, and in our community right now, I think they prefer the 5-day option for kiddos, and it's less strenuous on our daycare system, which is already stressed. It's less strenuous on our kiddos of need when they're in school for 5 days a week instead of 4. So that for all those other tangibles, you made a decision to remain in your current schedule. So I'm not sure if until we can see the evidence that, hey, a 4-day week is actually a great avenue to increase our student achievement, we do want to make that right decision. I think there's 2 reasons that 4-day week is a huge plus. I think it's staff morale, staff retention. I think that's overwhelmingly positive, and that is why many school districts consider a change. And the second would be to make sure you do it right with building schedules and operating so that our strategic plan goal of being a high performing district isn't gashed in any ways. But I think there's avenues for us to continue still to have that conversation and try to create wins on both sides and try to solve many of those problems before we potentially make that move. But I appreciate not necessarily rushing to do that over a budget decision and try to look at the bigger picture.
I'm curious if in August you can bring back there's one slide right now that is coming to mind from our previous levy work, and that's the why is the Coeur d'Alene School District levy what it is compared to some of the other districts, and it's so across the state, so different at every school. and district based on lots of moving pieces, but there is a slide, and there was a lot of information that would help me, I think, in my thought process.
Trustee Smith, are you referring to kind of the tax rate comparison between other districts?
A little bit.
Yeah,
and there's lots of moving things. I think of Moscow and the things that go into their district and community are so different. But often
Absolutely.
what comes to the surface is, well, Coeur d'Alene has the highest levy in the state.
But
But
in terms
we're
of
not
tax
comparing
rate,
things
it's on the lower end. Yeah, and the great thing is that we're
do
going to
that.
have Eric Herringer, our financial advisor for bonds and now levies, come and present too.
Terrific.
And he provides some great comparison data. So
Great.
it'll be a good August meeting.
That would help. Oh, he is? Okay, terrific. Great. Thank you.
And so what's the last 5 years, kind of year over year? Do we have any, has there always been a formula, or do we just go based upon need? Like, I guess what I've been voting on it for more than 5, well, that's only 2 levies, just kind of wondering if we have set a precedent, or is there a last time that we didn't increase it?
Yes.
I mean, this is marginal. And I would love to go with 25.75. I would think that would be, I'm tired of making cuts. I already think we've gone pretty deep, but I'm just wondering what it looks like historically.
Give me 2 seconds. Let me see if I can pull up this email that Seth just sent me.
I do think there's an argument to make 3%, with inflation rather than
Sure.
wait,
Yeah.
big jump.
Oh, totally.
Well,
that's, business. I mean,
Sure.
but it's, I do too. I just really wanted to pass. Really, really, really.
No, I don't know why I can't find Seth's email from literally just a little bit ago. Give me 2 seconds, and let me try one more time. One more place.
I'm reminded of those commercials for just 75 cents a day.
Yes.
You
Okay, I
can
found it.
Save the whales or the more important thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, looking back for the last 20 years, trustees, it varies. The average, well, there was a calculation, I think it's gone now, but anyway, in 2001, we increased the levy by 150,000. Oh, thanks. There's the percents are back. We increased the levy by 4.5%. The very next year, we increased it by 42%. We went from $5 million to an additional $1.5 million. So there must have been some big need or something, and this was back in 2003, right? But long story short, there was a year in 2007 that we did not increase it at all. There was a year in 2011 and a year in 2021. All of the other years, it was increased. And so generally speaking, the average increase is about 20%. So if you remember our last levy, we went from 20 million to 25. That's a 25% increase right there. So when you average all those out 2 years ago in 2019, when you ran the levy, you went from 16 million to 20 million. That was a $4 million increase. That's a 25% increase that you did. And the year before that, you had gone from 15 to 16. So that was only $1 million, so about short of 7% of an increase.
And some of those are inclusive of facility stuff, though, right?
Yeah, I'm guessing there could be other things. I'd have to cross-reference that with other bonds that were maybe run to address facility kinds of needs. I don't know. But again, the supplemental levy is primarily driven for staff, the salaries, and for the extra numbers, nursing, mental health, SROs, all those things that are not in the Idaho school funding model that you fund for the schools. And I don't know the history of how long you've had all of those programs. It could be long before 2001 here on this spreadsheet that Seth shared with me, but it could have, those could have come to pass sometime during that last 20, 25 years also. I don't know that history. I see Shannon.
We had the history pulled up from 2010-11 showing all the amounts. So
We just need 100 more kids.
Seth, are you controlling the mouse or? Okay. Always that awkward. Who's?
Yeah.
I could reference a baseball reference if I knew what baseball was. Okay. Okay. Oh, let's see. Okay. So. Yeah, so we have from 2010, 2011. So you can see the gradual increase. Sean, you'll know this better. The school year that kind of the property tax and sales tax was changed by legislation. Do you recall what year that was? Oh, okay, got it. Yeah. So you'll see supplemental bond, plant facilities, a tort, which pays for our helps pay for our property and liability insurance, and then the emergency levy. So we can go down the years.
Just to pause, the emergency levy is simply something that I believe we have a week or so, 6 days or so at the beginning of the school year to count students in seats. And if you surpass the numbers that you had the year before, you are allowed to emergency levy, because the state would say you might need more desks, more books, more teachers to staff for these extra enrollments than what you planned on. And that would be levied to your local tax dollars without a vote. So the board could choose to levy. They vote on that at a special meeting in September, and you could choose to vote that levy without a community input.
Yes. So it gradually was increasing kind of every 2 years. We have 15, 16. And then we had a period of 4 years where it did not change, from 2019-20 to 2022-23. And then, of course, bond levy is dependent on the principal and interest that year. So it just goes along with your debt schedule.
Great questions. Well, obviously lots to consider here. What other questions any trustee might have?
What would you do?
Well, if you're asking for Sean's personal opinion, I think large increases every few years are not good. I have always felt like a smaller nibble along the way is just better. I think generally speaking, if assessed valuations continue to grow and things, generally you get to still see your tax rates fall, and you're still just kind of keeping up with that inflation. It was one of the reasons that I was a big proponent, obviously, for the perpetual levy, because it would have locked in that dollar amount and it would have froze. So you would have been at 25 no matter what. But then every 5 years, 10 years, I don't know, whatever schedule you needed to adjust for inflation, you would have gone back to your community and specifically asked for just those inflationary dollars. And I felt like our community would really understand, okay, I can see that there's been a 10% inflation these last 5 years. I support 10% more of the levy, and your levy ask would have been just for that extra $2.5 million rather than the full 25. But that did not pass, and we are where we are today. I do think smaller, I think adding this $750,000, this dollar a month, I think that's obviously very reasonable. But I also am, just like every trustee here, I think the most important thing is that we've all recognized that this levy is not supplemental, it's fundamental, and it's really needed. And so I think that's where you all get paid the big bucks to make the decision on the tax implications and the community, support that's out there or not. So because I would rather be back here in a year trying to figure out the $750,000 of cuts that we'll have to do for the budget rather than cutting $25 million. So obviously that's the big question. And I just wanted to share with you the dollar. I think our community understands that, and the vast majority of the meetings that I've had in the last several months with our community, they understand inflation. So I think that just needs to be known so you can factor in your choices. I think a dollar-ish a month under what we currently know today, most people can understand that. Now, you get to decide whether you think they'll support that or not, and what's the best avenue. But I think our community has been overwhelmingly supportive of our school systems and our programs and our offerings. We are doing some great things in our schools, and our community is seeing that, and they're envisioning that. They're supporting that. Holy cow, with the amount of donations that have come in to schools for various programs, whether that's bands and choirs or football fields, and everything in between is just incredible. So I absolutely do believe our community is engaged in our schools, and will continue to be. And so I think you've got to decide whether you think that inflationary component ask is realistic, or if we need to go back and additionally maybe tweak and cut. And then I do think too that as we have shared, and I know it's future work for the board, but my hope is to bring to you a school board's resolution at your July 8th board meeting, where you potentially could be the sponsoring school board of maybe changing some legislature so that we weren't tied to a 1, 2, or forever supplemental levy. I think a supplemental levy that would go up to 4 or 6 years would be the way to go. I think our community, based upon those that I have bounced around the conversation with, I think they could get behind supporting a levy maybe every 4 years or 6 years. They still know that it's not forever, which I think is a bigger ask. Obviously, we heard that a year and a half, 2 years ago. But I think 4 to 6 makes great sense. It keeps the staff morale much higher. It reduces the expenses to Trustee Bjerke's perspective. Now you're only having to really promote that educational component of the levy every 4 to 6 years instead of, seems like, every couple years, every year and a half. And I think if that's something that you choose to support, we'll get that sent down to Boise, to the State School Boards Association by their July 31st deadline. And then that's presented to all your school boards at your state conference in November. And if the rest of the state votes yay on that resolution, it could become a talking point for the state. And we could work with some legislators the next year or two and try to get something to open on behalf of schools rather than always closing on behalf of schools. And I think our staff, our community would be very supportive of something like that. So I'm eager to work through all the details of that with you here in a couple weeks.
I'm super excited about that. One of my most frequent comments during the March 23 levy was, why can't you do 5 years or 10 years rather than perpetual? So I think people would really appreciate a little longer than 2 years, because 2 years is quick, but not,
Thank
not
you.
perpetual.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think, hopefully my hope would be that this levy will pass in November. The legislative session starts in January, and we begin that conversation. It's pretty aggressive to think that we would be successful this first session of getting the votes that we would need. But I think it's very doable, possibly the second year. And that would be great, because that could be, our first year of our current levy. So if the law changed, it'd go into effect in July that next year. And then when we brought it back to our community back in 27, so you could vote on it in 26 in November if you chose, or May of 27, you could have the potential option to ask for a 4, 5, 6 year, whatever you felt the community might like, and better support. So that's the future work there.
So Mr. Herringer is going to come to our August regular meeting?
Correct.
Okay.
He will. And it sounds like if your workshop is on the 28th, we would know by then the tax ramifications.
Yeah, and there's still estimates, but it'll be so we'll know August revenues for next year, so 24-25. We'll have 2 years worth of the property tax relief funding. underway, so we will have a better idea for the August 2025 revenue, but it's still going to be an estimate, but a much better picture on what it could be.
So Shannon, can I just ask from a ballot language question?
Right.
If the board approved a ballot language at their regular August meeting or the end of August, does that matter? Is the language going to be still the same?
Well, I mean, we can only use the current assessed value that we know.
At either one of those two times at that month, that's not going to change.
No, it won't change. Yeah.
That's my thought.
That was
So
my
I-
question. When do we know updated assessment?
The 2024 assessed values, I believe we would know. We would know estimates by August. I would have to check with our bond attorneys though, and Eric. But yeah. Unfortunately, because the timing is so different, that the assessed values will be pretty outdated for a levy that is for FY25 and FY26. But once we get on a better schedule, it's just kind of the unintended consequences of a November election date.
So what happens is the ballot language is going to say one thing, and then we could be, it's challenging to be out in the community saying a different thing, saying that the taxes are actually going to be less than what you might see on that ballot, because the ballot's going to be based upon real actuals today.
All right. Are we good? I think so. All right, there's the future dates there, and just again for the community to note that our next meeting has been rescheduled to July 8th, and that's our next regular meeting. August 12th then will be our next meeting following that, and then we're working on a workshop for the end of August. All right, we're going to move then into executive session, and so is there a motion to enter executive session per Idaho Code 74-206J to consider labor contract matters authorized under section 74-206A 1A and B? So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
And then,
Trustee Smith?
yes.
Trustee Bierke?
Yes.
Trustee Tenbrink? Yes. Trustee Anderson? Yes. Trustee McCandless? Yep. All right.
Terrific. Well, we'll move into executive session and kind of clear the room. And thanks, everyone, for that.